Hello, everybody. Welcome to the best session of Ignite 2017. Everybody having fun yet? Excellent. Thank you for joining. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able to present to you. I know, as Lee said yesterday, we know you have incredibly busy lives and incredibly busy jobs. It really means a lot to us that you've taken a few days off to come talk to us. And it's an honor and privilege to be able to present the best practices to you. A little bit about myself. I joined Palo Networks about a year ago. In fact, I joined a week before last year's Ignite, and I was able to talk to many of you. And I hope to be able to present at many more Ignites. Really enjoying my time here at Palo Networks. It's really great to be at a company that, where the customers love the product so much. A big part of my job has been to evangelize the best practices, talk to customers about best practices. I've been in the security industry for a decade, and in IT industry for about 17 years. And I've talked to a lot of customers, enterprises, government, healthcare, educational institutions, and talked a lot about the strategy for security, both in the public cloud, private cloud, as well as in general adoption of best practices. And I'll share that with you. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a day in the life of one of your users and follow his storyline as he goes through the day, see what he does at the internet edge, and then see how you can minimize the risk of a cyber breach while allowing him access to all the applications that he needs to perform his job. Right? And during this course, we'll also, as we follow the story, we'll also take a look at the best practices and how best practices can help you minimize the risk, at the same time minimizing the chance of a disruption and help you optimize security. So before we go ahead, let's talk about the internet edge. The internet edge is, your users and your devices go through the internet edge for personal use applications, work-related applications. Many of these applications today live out on the internet. And also, in many cases, shadow IT applications or risk applications. Right? So these applications are all going to be covered in this session today. And also, there are many applications that servers access for updates, right? What we are not going to cover in this session is any applications that you host in Azure or Amazon, right? Because that's something we consider still a part of your data center, and that's something that we will cover in a follow-up session, the data center best practices. So a question for you, how many of you already have gotten at least one thing out of Ignite that you're going to go back and directly implement as soon as you go back to your organization? At least one thing. Okay, so about 50%. My goal in this session is to be able to share with you at least some best practices that you can implement right away in your organization. And then there will be other best practices that will take time because they require a buy-in from other stakeholders, they require some analysis, and so they may take some time for you to implement. But I want to give you some key pieces of advice or recommendations that you can implement right away and be more secure. Do you know who the generational group that is the biggest component of American workforce today is? It's the millennials, right? So Lee talked about them yesterday as well. They're people born between 1980 and 1995 or 97. They're about 20 to 35 years of age. They already comprise 35% of the workforce and rising. And I'm sure the trend is very similar worldwide. So what we're going to do is follow the story of one of these users, Joe. This user is 25 years old, joined the organization, let's say your organization, about 3 months ago in sales operations. Joe was born right here in Vancouver. And he's had access to a computing device ever since he was a kid. Right? So he always expects access to the internet. He is largely a visual learner, so whenever he needs to learn about anything, he accesses YouTube. And his preferred mode of communication is Snapchat, or Slack, or text and IM, instead of you getting up and actually talking to him. Right, so let's follow the day in the life of Joe as he comes into the office. His day starts with responding to email. So even though he hates it, but until email is replaced by an entirely new mode of communication in the office, like Slack or something else, he still needs to respond to email. So his company uses Office 365, and because he is new to the organization, he gets several emails with tickets in ServiceNow for access to the gym, or workplace resources, or access to new software applications. As he is part of the sales organization, many emails from his team members have links to Salesforce. As he does meetings during the day, collaborates with other employees, he also accesses Box because that's the sanctioned file repository from his organization. And also, Joe being Joe, he always has Instagram and Twitter open because that's how he communicates with his friends as well as his colleagues. And occasionally, he also checks Apple News to catch up on the news of the day. Right? In the afternoon, Joe is working at his desk, and he's always listening to his favorite Kendrick Lamar playlist on Spotify as he works. And as we already talked about, he's a visual learner, so whenever he needs to learn something about SharePoint or about Salesforce, he always goes to YouTube. He's also a basketball fan. He follows Grizzlies, the original home team of Vancouver, so he accesses sports websites like ESPN. In the evening, after the office hours, he goes to the office gym, and there his iPhone syncs his health data and workout data with iCloud. As he goes home after dinner, he does a late evening meeting with his sales counterparts in Asia Pacific over Zoom. And his tech colleagues have taught him how to use BitTorrent to transfer and share large files, including music and video files, with other friends and colleagues. And look, he's also figured out how to use Microsoft RDP. So he can RDP into a shared workstation in the organization to access Tableau software, which requires heavy processing. So now let's take a look at all of these applications from the eyes of the security professional, your eyes, the eyes that typically see risk in any transaction, right? There's a huge uptick in phishing emails. These emails are present in both the work inbox as well as personal inbox. We've also seen phishing come in from social media, like LinkedIn. When he accesses social media, again, there are some other risks as well. As he accesses file sharing applications like Box, or maybe even some unsanctioned applications, there is a risk of accidental upload of sensitive data. You've also seen an uptick in ransomware, and you hear about it from your peers in the industry. You've done some educational campaigns, sending fake links, phishing-type emails to all the employees to see how many click despite your educational efforts. And Joe was actually one of the users who clicked this link. There is, of course, drive-by downloads, malware. So the question in your mind is, how do we secure, how do we allow Joe access to all the applications that he needs, at the same time protecting him from himself and protecting your organization from a cyber breach? And that's where the best practices come in. Now, what is the best practice? Best practice security policy prevents breaches by really minimizing the chance of a successful attack at every stage of the attack lifecycle. So remember, if you're able to minimize the chance of, let's say, leveraging an exploit to install malware, or executing the actual malware which may get installed, or minimize the chance of of command and control communication, if we minimize the chance of each of these happening, the overall chance of the successful breach happening and the attacker being able to get the sensitive data out of your organization is really low. And that's why, again, as Lee mentioned yesterday, we are trying to make it incredibly hard, very difficult, time-consuming, and resource-intensive, and expensive for the attacker to be able to execute all of these stages to be able to get the data out. So that's what the best practice policy helps you with. It also, no security vendor can claim that an attacker will never gain access to your network. Some credentials may have already been leaked. There are other ways for attacker to gain access. So if an attacker is able to gain access, the best practice security policy identifies the presence of the attacker and alerts you in real time, not as a detect and remediate solution, but still with a focus on prevention. How does it do that? You've seen this, you saw this in Lee's keynote, must have seen this in other sessions as well, because that's what we do at Palo Alto Networks. A best practice security policy, first of all, gives you complete visibility in what's happening in your network. It then reduces the attack surface by making sure you only allow access to those applications that are really required, and also by enforcing the privilege of least access. You should only be allowed access to internal resources that are really required by you. It also prevents all known threats, and then ultimately it also detects any attacks that were, or threats that were previously unknown, converts them into known, and then blocks that. So we'll take a look at all of these stages. So best practice security policy does a lot of good things. But at the same time, and I've talked to a lot of you, and from your own acknowledgement, you don't always implement the best practice policy. Why? Some concerns may hold you back. One of the concerns that I've heard is a risk of disruption. I've talked to many of you, and I've heard comments like, the day that I drop the first legitimate packet will be the last day of my job. Right? So that comment may seem exaggeration or extreme to you, but I get it. I know that availability oftentimes trumps security. I know that you do not want to interrupt the CEO's webcast on the investor day just because you were not able to identify an application and you implemented a complete whitelist policy, denied everything else, you missed one application and that had a negative impact, right? So we get it. And that's why the best practice security policy minimizes the risk of disruption. And I'll share with you those best practices. Right? So you don't have to implement a complete whitelist on day one, even though that's our goal. We make it a gradual goal. We take some steps towards moving to a whitelist by first gaining visibility, by knowing what's happening in your network so that you don't miss out on any applications that may be required. Another concern, maybe it's very difficult to change. I've talked to customers that have more than 100,000 policies or rules on their firewall. How many of you have more than 10,000 rules? Doesn't have to be on Palo Alto Networks firewalls. How many of you have seen 10,000 rules or more on a firewall? A few? So it took years to get to thousands of rules on the firewall. And we don't expect you to change those to 50 app ID and user-based rules overnight. Right? Again, it's a gradual process. What I want to do is share with you those best practices that you can implement right away, and then there are some others that will take time so that you can minimize the disruption risk. You can also make it easier for you to handle that change in bite-sized chunks. Another concern that I've heard is that you may have lack of skilled staff. Now, for those of you who are new to Palo Alto Networks, our user interface is not that command line interface that required CCIEs to operate, right? It's an easy to use interface, and also we take pride in the fact that you can actually convert your business policy into the firewall as is. So if your CIO comes up to you and says, I want you to block access to all consumer accounts of Office 365, and I want you to allow access only to my enterprise account on Office 365. You can actually take that business policy and convert them to a firewalled rule using applications and app IDs. So even though implementing the best practice does take some investment of time and resources, it's really well worth it. I'll share with you some customer examples towards the end of this presentation and share with you how customers have gotten quantifiable benefits by implementing best practices. And you can do the same. So one piece of feedback that I've gotten from customers, both from Ignite and in general, is we have a list of best practices, and sometimes that can seem overwhelming or daunting. And that's why some of the customers don't get started, because it's too big to implement. You have busy projects, and you don't have enough downtime or time to implement the best practices in your organization. So my goal is to be able to, again, break down best practices into bite-sized chunks, show you what the hierarchy of importance is so that you can implement some of these right away, and again, some of these may take time. Now, it's important to emphasize that all of these buckets of the pyramid or layers of the pyramid are important. It's critical that you implement all of them if you want to be protected from cyber breaches. But it's also important to realize that some of these will not require a lot of analysis. So they can be implemented right away and will give you an awesome ROI on your efforts. And then you can implement some of the others that may require some time. So we are all, advanced security practitioners. The bottom layer of the pyramid is basic hygiene. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. You must always upgrade to the latest maintenance release, whichever OS you are on. You may be on PanOS 6.x or 7.x or 8.x. Always upgrade to the latest maintenance release. Also, always apply the latest content updates. Follow the best practices that are laid down in our admin guide to use those content updates, maybe even test those content updates before you make them live to minimize any chance of disruption. Also, segment your network, whether it's a simple segmentation like internet, DMZ, and internal network, or it's a slightly more advanced segmentation, like you may segment your internal network into users, critical assets, important assets, and all other assets. Segment your network. So because, again, this is for advanced practitioners, we're not going to spend a lot of time in basic hygiene, assuming you've implemented all of this. We're going to spend most of our time in the top 4 layers of this pyramid. Security profiles give you a great ROI because they don't require a lot of analysis. They don't require you to talk to a lot of stakeholders. They don't require a buy-in from other stakeholders, unlike some of the other layers. And so they can be implemented right away. And they must straight up be implemented to all the allowed traffic. We have various different security profiles. And we'll talk about each of these security profiles, and I'm going to talk about them in a specific order. And that'll correspond to the attack lifecycle. We're going to minimize the chances of attack by following the attack lifecycle. First, let's take a look at file blocking. So how do malware writers install malware or deliver malware? Through a lot of files. What we've done is we've analyzed the different file types, seen what file types most correspond to malware being delivered, and what are, out of those file types, what are the file types that your users typically do not have any business downloading from the internet. So those files are categorized into the file blocking profile. And by the way, this file blocking profile is available to you with PanOS, doesn't require an additional subscription. File types like DLLs, Java class files, link files that point to an executable, executables themselves, control panel files. These files should not be downloaded from the internet. So we must protect Joe from himself. If he accidentally clicks on one of these file types, you must protect that, right? So implement the file blocking default profile, which will block all of these file types. In addition, we also recommend that for compressed files and archives, you implement a warning to the user. So there is a profile or a setting called continue, so that you can present the users with a warning, show them the risk of downloading these files, a potential risk, and then the user can choose whether to continue or to stop or abort that transaction. In addition, we, of course, always recommend that you log all other file types. So what we are doing here is we're trying to reduce the surface area of attack. So we've eliminated some file types that are commonly known to deliver malware. Now, let's take a look at URL filtering. Again, a common means of delivering malware. URL filtering is not just required to reduce the risk of acceptable use. We pay a lot of emphasis, we devote a lot of time and energy in making sure that we capture and categorize websites that are known to host malicious pages or credential phishing pages. So I've talked to many customers that have enterprises as well as especially higher ed institutes that have a very free and open internet policy. So I don't care how free or open internet policy you have, what kind of acceptable use policy you have, you should use the default URL filtering blocking profile so that you block access to these websites and categories like malware, phishing, dynamic DNS, unknown, proxy anonymizers, right? So even if you have a free internet policy, there is no reason for you to be allowing access in general to your organization to these websites. In some cases, there may be some exception required. For example, we have malware writers that occasionally need access to a malware website to do some research or do some forensics. And in that case, we recommend you be very specific. Allow a specific user or a group access to a specific URL or a set of URLs and make it time-bound so that you don't open up access to your entire organization. The only categories that may require some thought and analysis from you are extremism and copyright infringement, because they could potentially be more on acceptable use, reducing the acceptable use risk than security risk. But they can be, they are known to host malware as well. In addition to outright blocking these categories that are listed in the first category, we also recommend that you warn users when they go to some risky website. And this is something that we've implemented at Palo Networks. So some websites and categories like gaming, hacking, these websites could potentially pose a risk. So it's best to warn users, educate users, present them with that warning page, and then allow them to either continue or abort the transaction based on the risk. And of course, you must alert all other categories. So again, what we are doing is we are reducing the risk. We've eliminated some file types that are commonly known to, commonly associated with malware and that your users do not have any business downloading. We've also reduced the risk by eliminating certain URL categories. What does an attacker do when the attacker wants to install malware? The attacker looks for vulnerabilities in the client or the server to install that malware. That's where the vulnerability profile helps you. So this looks for any vulnerabilities that may be present in your clients and systems, and typically they are present in unpatched clients and servers and operating systems. You must have heard of exploit kits like Angler and Nuclear and Sundown exploit kit and so on. So what do these exploit kits do? They again look for these vulnerabilities that are commonly known, but the systems may be unpatched, and use that vulnerability to install malware. So that's why we recommend you use the strict vulnerability profile, which will protect you from all of these vulnerabilities present in your clients or servers, even if they are unpatched, and prevent the attacker from downloading and installing malware. In addition to looking for vulnerabilities, it also helps you capture packets so that in case there is an attack, you can track down the source. So let's now assume that the attacker was somehow able to find a vulnerability. What does the attacker do? The attacker installs the malware. So antivirus is actually a legacy name. It's an old name. It's It should ideally be changed, but we'll stick with this name because we use this. But antivirus not only helps you against viruses, it helps you against malware, ransomware bots, keyloggers, Trojans. So it helps you prevent installation of any of these types of malware. Right? So we again recommend that you apply the default profile. What it does is whenever your traffic matches an antivirus signature, it takes the default action that is recommended by Palo Alto Networks. In some cases, it may be alert. In some cases, it may be block. So it takes that default action. Now, an interesting thing is whenever the traffic matches a WildFire signature, which is you convert, you detect previously unknown malware. Whenever traffic matches a WildFire signature, by default, we allow it. So this is one instance where we actually recommend you change the default setting to block for best practice adoption. In addition, antivirus signatures are enabled for 4 protocols by default. We recommend that you enable them for all protocols. So what we've done, again, taking a step back, blocked the files, blocked some malicious URLs, looked for vulnerabilities. We also are blocking viruses and malware, different types of malware from getting installed. What does an attacker do if somehow he's able to install malware? The attacker wants to establish command and control communication so that he can contact the compromised host, find out a way to leak data, and then get access to the sensitive data and leak it out, right? Exfiltrate that data. So anti-spyware profile helps you with that. It looks for command and control communication that is going back to known malicious domains and IP addresses and blocks that communication. So it not only helps you in blocking that communication, it also helps you identify any compromised hosts on your network. And attackers also use this communication mechanism to move laterally from one host to another host. Right? So if you have the anti-spyware profile, it helps you with that as well. So we recommend that you implement the strict profile, which will block any connection with medium, high, or critical severity alerts. In addition, it also looks for DNS queries that are happening from compromised hosts out to the internet to known malicious domains or IP addresses, and it blocks that. Again, as I said, it not only blocks the communication, but it also is a very helpful way for you to see which compromised systems are present in your network. Okay, so again, taking a step back, files, URL categories, we've taken a look at vulnerabilities, malware, and also if the malware does get installed, you're installing anti-spyware or using the anti-spyware profile to block any command and control communication. So if you've actually implemented all of the security profiles that I've mentioned so far, you've blocked all of the known threats. But what about unknown threats? That's where WildFire comes in. WildFire, just as Lee said yesterday, has analyzed billions of files since its inception. And what it does is it uses a combination of techniques, including static analysis and dynamic analysis, heuristics-based analysis. It runs the files on a custom hypervisor, as well as, if required, on bare metal to figure out what are the characteristics of this file. Does it have any characteristics that may indicate that this is malware, which has not been seen by us or by any of our technology partners in the past? So if it is indeed malware, it generates signatures to identify that malware and propagates those signatures. So it basically converts that, and that threat basically becomes known. So that's why we recommend that by default, you forward all the files in both directions to WildFire Cloud. If you don't have a WildFire subscription, by the way, you still get the benefit. You do get WildFire updates and signatures every 24 hours. If you do have the subscription, you get the updates for any unknown malware within 5 minutes of detection. If you can't forward all the files, we recommend that you forward the files that are typically associated with malware, like PDFs, Microsoft Office files, Flash files, Java and class files, Android files, portable executables. Another tip for you, by default, any of the decrypted traffic is not sent to the WildFire cloud. And so we recommend that you go into the Content ID settings and enable this setting so that all the decrypted content and files can also be sent to WildFire. So with all of this, you would have implemented, you would have gotten a great ROI on your investment because, again, as I said, these security profiles do not require a lot of analysis. They do not require a buy-in from other stakeholders. They straight up must be implemented and applied to all allowed traffic. Talking about decryption, this is really important, and I've also seen a lot of security professionals being really fearful of enabling decryption. A lot of the reasons are related to privacy and legal concerns, and then there are other reasons related to technical concerns or performance impact concerns. So we recommend that you set the ball rolling by starting the discussion of decryption in your organization. How do you do that? By educating your organization. I've been talking to customers about decryption for several years now. Till a few years ago, it was not very easy to get statistics on how much traffic out there is encrypted. But it has become much easier now, like you see in this graph from Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is a free CA, certificate authority, run for the website holders or website owners. It gives certificates to website owners for free and in a very easy to use way so that they can make the websites HTTPS compliant or convert them into HTTPS. So as you can see in this graph here, there has been a huge uptick due to the events of the last couple of years, a huge uptick in the number of websites and domains that use certificates from Let's Encrypt. In addition, you also see data published by browser vendors like Google. This is data from their transparency project. Again, publicly available data. So users today, like Joe, are spending up to 75% of their time on HTTPS websites. How do you secure this traffic when you can't see or control this traffic? It's all encrypted. So use this data to start the discussion in your organization about decryption. Let's take a look at how Joe got infected. He browsed to a computer's website, saw the secure padlock icon, and thought that secure means safe, and downloaded the software. Bad mistake. Because this turned out to be Kin's virus, Kin's Trojan. This is a Trojan which was found in banking organizations. Typically looks for, it hijacks the browser process and looks for your credentials that are typically sent to online banking websites. And this is research done by Unit 42, our threat intelligence team. You can see that the Trojan was downloaded over port 443 securely. Not only was the Trojan downloaded over 443, it also established command and control communication over port 443. So you will not be able to see the Trojan getting downloaded because it is encrypted. You will also not be able to see the command and control communication it's establishing back to the attacker because it's encrypted. So again, in the interest of breaking down the best practices into some things that you can implement right away, here are some things that you can do as soon as you go back. I recommend that you enforce certificate controls for all traffic. This does not require you to enable decryption. This is something that you can do right away. You do not require decryption to be enabled. A lot of these websites that, for example, the website that Joe was communicating with, these websites use self-signed certificates or expired certificates or untrusted certificates. There is no reason for your users to be going out to these websites. Even though browsers present a big warning whenever users go to these websites, users don't care. Right? So they always proceed to these websites. So this is a way for you to protect users from themselves, their own actions, and protect your organization. Now, once you do have consensus in your organization or agreement or buy-in from stakeholders, we do recommend that you enable decryption for all traffic except sensitive categories that are listed here. And you will get requests to bypass decryption for certain categories or certain situations. I recommend that you keep these bypass or rules to a minimum and make them very narrow. For example, you may require bypassing of Dropbox client traffic if your organization sanctions the use of Dropbox because they use certificate pinning for clients. Or in certain other situations. Again, keep these decryption bypasses to a minimum or a narrow band. And when you do implement decryption, block sessions, again, with bad certificate status, block sessions with unsupported versions, and also unsupported cipher suites. There is a lot that we can cover about decryption. I'm not going to cover everything, so I invite you to this session, which is 1:30 p.m. today in this place, led by Phil and Paul. That's going to talk, an hour about decryption and all the settings and the ways in which you should enable those settings. So now let's talk about the top two parts of the pyramid. Again, as I said, all of these parts are critical and they are important, but you implement some capabilities right away and some capabilities require some time to implement. Within application-based policies, what are the things that you can implement right away? You can block malicious traffic. We publish what we call external feeds that you can import into your policies and use those external feeds to, one, block traffic to and from any known malicious IP addresses. And again, this doesn't require constant updates from you. Once you import that into your policy, we do the work of maintaining and updating those feeds. Two, also log traffic to and from high-risk IP addresses, again published in a feed by us. Three, if you have not used MindMeld, try it, evaluate it. If you do use MindMeld, it publishes, again, a feed of domains, URLs, IP addresses that may be malicious. Use that to drop traffic. This is using information from third parties. So you not only get the intelligence from Palo Alto networks, but also from third-party feeds. Also, number four, this is interesting because we did not originally have this in our best practice policy, but as we've talked to customers, we saw that a lot of the customers actually do want to drop traffic from specific geos or specific countries to enhance their security posture. And you may want to drop traffic from North Korea, for example. Some of you may drop traffic from Iran or Russia. Again, this is dependent on what you consider high risk. So this is also part of the best practice policy. Now, if you've implemented all of these capabilities, now we're ready to address Joe's applications more directly. So remember the applications that Joe uses? Let's address them more directly. How will you do that? The best practice policy is that you create different categories of policies. Number one, you will allow all sanctioned applications. Some of these may be open to everybody in your organization, like ServiceNow and Box, if you use that as your sanctioned file sharing apps. And some of these may be open only to specific teams. For example, only the development team will access the source code. So the tip is here to use an application group. Create an application group with all the sanctioned applications and put them in one policy so that you don't have to update more policies as more applications get sanctioned or you want to remove something from the list of sanctioned applications. Second, allow applications that you're willing to tolerate. These may include general web browsing applications, sports applications, social media, especially required for newer employees, right? In fact, all of us use it. We use it for work-related reasons as well. We use Twitter and LinkedIn to communicate with our customers. Now you are ready to drop some unsanctioned applications, applications that your organization does not sanction. For example, all the file sharing applications that are not sanctioned. You would also drop risky applications. You would drop apps that should not be going out to the internet. For example, SMTP and DNS. There's no reason why these applications should be going out to the internet. There should be an internal DNS server that you talk to. The tip here is to use an application filter. So you can create application filters based on characteristics of applications, like peer-to-peer. Right? So if you create a filter based on peer-to-peer, anytime we introduce a new application that has that characteristic, automatically gets added there. So you don't have to individually list all the applications, and you don't have to keep them updated. We do that work for you. So now you remember we talked about all of the applications, moving towards whitelist, and that's our ultimate goal. But at the same time, you don't want to disrupt that investor's podcast or webcast that your CEO is doing. So what do? You make moving towards whitelist a gradual goal, and you add more rules that give you more visibility, that allow you to monitor applications and gaps in your organization. You'll introduce rules like allow web browsing on TCP 443. You will allow applications only on their default port. Remember, it's acceptable to do this because we've already used all the security profiles. We've blocked risky applications. We've blocked risky URLs. So now you're ready to allow some of these applications to monitor what else is going on in your network so that you don't break other applications before you know what applications should be listed in your whitelist. And then you may allow applications on all ports. Ultimately, you may log all the traffic. Again, remember, the reason we are doing this is to monitor unusual activity, monitor alarming behavior, monitor applications that you may not know exist and are required in your organization. Some of the applications may only be used once a quarter or once a year, like tax-related applications. So you may want to keep these rules around for a while to monitor all the applications, and slowly, as you gain more knowledge, move some of these applications into the sanctioned list, some of these applications in the tolerated list, and other applications into the denied list, so that one day, hopefully, you can remove all or most of these rules and move to a complete whitelist policy, which is the eventual goal. So now let's talk about the tip of the pyramid, which is user-based policy. We all know that user-based policy allows you to enforce role-based access control, but it also allows you to reduce the attack surface. User ID is enforced, user ID is detected and enforced on the first packet. So any user ID-based rules are enforced on the first packet on the session setup, unlike some app-based rules, which may require some packets to flow through the firewall before the application is discovered or the application function is discovered. User ID also helps you prevent credential-based attacks. You saw some of that in Lee's keynote. There is also another session later today if you want to find out more details about how we prevent credential-based attacks using user ID. It also helps you deploy best practices, because once you're, for example, ready to roll out decryption, you may want to do it based on users and groups. For example, you may roll out decryption first for your own group, your security group or IT group, before you roll out to all the other business groups. It also helps you enable application access. For example, Joe, because he's part of sales operations, should not get access to source code. Also, I've heard from many customers that AD scraping and log scraping gives them 95% accuracy or 90% accuracy. And unless they can get to 100% accuracy, they can't use user ID in their policies and rules. Now, remember that user ID or getting user identity there is a hierarchy of fidelity. For highest fidelity, we recommend you use Global Protect, use Captive Portal and AAA sources. For example, you get user identity from your wireless LAN controllers, including our partnership with Aruba. So these are high fidelity sources of user identity. Remember, you can use Global Protect even if today you're using a third-party VPN client. And you can also use Global Protect to get user identity even when the users are inside your network and are not VPNing in. So again, there is a lot that we can cover about user ID. So if you were not able to attend this session yesterday, refer to best practices on user ID that are available on live.paloaltonetworks.com. Also refer to our technical documentation. The chapters on policy and user ID give you best practices. Also stop by our booths. I'll give you the booth numbers. Stop by our booths to talk to us more about user ID implementation. So now that we've covered all of these layers of the pyramid, are you done? So this is a constant work. This is something that will require constant updates, but at the same time, once you've implemented these basic fundamental building blocks, the rest of the tuning and reviewing and monitoring work can be done at your own pace. It's not a lot of work once you've implemented the basic building blocks. And why do you need continuous work? Because the business environment changes. Attackers continue to evolve. The users change and their preferences and needs change. As soon as you're able to shape your internet policy to address Joe's applications, the next generation, the iGen or the Generation Z will be coming over the next 2 to 3 years. They will be becoming part of the workforce, and they will massively influence and shape your internet edge policy. Plus, vendors introduced new URL categories, new application updates, so you need to put some investment into reviewing, monitoring these policies, and continuously moving towards the best practices. Now, of course, one of the things that comes to mind is it does require work, a fair amount of work. Is it worth it? And that's where I want to share some success stories. This is a professional and legal services company in Europe. They were able to eliminate ransomware and reduce policy management time by 50%, and they freed up more internet bandwidth. So number one, what this tells you is that you can quantify the benefits. If you need to justify the investment that you want to make into best practices to your management, go and look at case studies available on our website. These are all public case studies, including the customer names. All of these are available. You may even be able to get in touch with these customers if you need, and use these case studies to develop a case, justify your investment into best practices. This is an electricity distribution company in New Zealand. They were able to reduce time to complete incidents tenfold. Realized, again, reduction in network bandwidth consumption and shaved the number of policies. This is a public sector organization in the US. They were able to improve firewall efficiency, reduced operating expenses by as much as 76%, and enforced consistent security policies and did automation, right? So when you start this project on implementing best practices, make your goals clear. You can not only maximize the security protection, but you can also quantify its benefits in other terms like these customers have done. So that's all I had to cover in terms of best practices. There is a lot of information that's available live at paloaltonetworks.com, also on our website. I also encourage you to stop by professional services, tools for deployment success. They will show you tools that you can use to figure out the health of your organization, the health of your policies today, and where you are in the continuum. Also talk to Fuel User Group and figure out if there is a user group in your organization, in your city. So thank you for attending. What we'll do is I have colleagues, product managers who are available to answer questions. We'll take some questions. We have just like a couple minutes left, but even if we run out of time here on the stage, we will be around and make sure we are able to answer all of your questions. Questions? So wait for the mic. So you can take the mic, Nick.
On the one slide, it mentioned allowing web browsing on 443. Is that only if you're using decryption on that specific box and have that decrypted on that box, I guess?
Do you want to talk about that?
So web browsing on 443, the standard port for web browsing in our definition is port 80. So if you're using decryption, you'll actually have to allow it on a custom service object for 443. That is correct. It has to be decrypted on that? Yes, yes, that is correct.
This is an easy question. I just wanted to know, we're going to be able to get access to these slide decks at some point?
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, I don't know. Talk to the people at the registration. Maybe they will be able to find out.
One thing I might add on that, in our product documentation on paloaltonetworks.com/documentation, we actually have gone through many of the both the internet gateway best practices as well as the data center best practices that you'll see in the session that follows this one. So much of the recommendations are available there already and actually have been for some time. So if you have some feedback on that, we'd love to hear it. That should give you a formula for implementing these best practices.
Yep.
Hey, I have a quick question I'm relaying from my counterpart. He's asking for the Aruba integration. Is the best practice to go straight through the PAN firewall or to use the PAN agent to query the Aruba?
Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
That's a good question. I think that's going to depend heavily on the environment and what kind of user population you have and how much data you're pulling out of, whether it's ClearPass or the wireless LAN controller. Why don't you swing up afterwards and I'll connect you with some of the folks in the expo hall who can dive into that a little deeper with you to make an assessment.
More questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions, we will hang out here for a few more minutes. Feel free to stop by. Thank you.